Alright, I have a few books that I've been reading these past couple of weeks, and I would love to show you guys what I've been reading, and also hopefully this can be somewhat of a recommendation to you if you're looking for some interesting literature. The longest time I've always been reading contemporary fiction, and for some reason I've never really understood the hype around certain books. I felt disappointed. Sometimes I feel like I've wasted my time reading those books. There's something, I'm lacking something about a lot of these bestseller contemporary novels. I think I've been lacking depth in a lot of these novels. So what I decided earlier was to go back to the classics and try to understand why these classics are, why they've been around for so long and why people keep rereading them, generation through generation. I started looking into more classics, and I've been very, very satisfied with the reads so far. And two of them I don't have with me. I do have three of them here, but I'll start with the two first ones because I'm currently at my uncle's country house. So the first one that I read was Stoner by John Williams, I think that's his name. And I think this is a book that's been hyped so much lately. I feel like I've seen it everywhere. Without a doubt, it's a fantastic, beautifully written book. It's about a man called John Stoner, I think. Is it John? It's Will Stoner, I think. I'm confused. You follow Mr. Stoner through his life. So from his teenage years until his deathbed. And he starts by studying at the University of Columbia, I believe it is. And then he also continues his profession at the same university as a professor. It's a very still, slightly melancholic book. It's not really, there's not a lot of things happening. It's a very quiet book, and it's beautifully written. It has a very stoic tone to it, or at least the main character is very stoic in his approach to life, which I find is quite fascinating to read. So it was a beautiful book, although I feel like there were a few elements in there where I wish I would have found out more. I was very interested in the story about his wife, because the story kind of talks about the relationship between the two and how they didn't get along very much, but they continued to stay married until the very end. But then his wife is described as, which again is a very old term, but she's being described as hysteric at times. And I'm very interested in understanding why that is. I have a lot of thoughts to why women around that time, this was the early 1900s, were described as hysterics. Women who were housewives and who had to kind of follow the rules of society. And besides that, I thought it was a fantastic read. It was a beautifully written book, very deep. You follow the character very deep into his bones, because it's just, you follow his life and his thinking pattern, and yeah, you get very, very close to him, which I really enjoyed reading. I read another classic by Tove Jansson, who is a very well-known Finnish author. She is the author of all the Moomin books and characters. As a Scandinavian person, I grew up with it, so Tove Jansson has always been a big figure in my life. And so I read a book by her called The Summer Book, which was a fantastic read. It's also, again, beautifully written. It's about a little girl spending her summer at her grandmother's cabin in the Finnish Gulf, so in the archipelago of Finland. And the descriptions of nature and just the scenery is very well described, so you can really picture it in front of you. But what I realized when reading this book, stories from the perspective of a child in a very harsh adult life, if that makes sense. You read the dialogues between this grandchild and her grandmother, and you see it's this beautiful clash between this naive, imaginative point of viewing life combined with the wisdom of an of an older person, grandmother in this case, and just reading their dialogues, especially if you've had yourself a very close relationship with your grandmother, I feel like there are a lot of parallels that you can recognize yourself in. So that was a beautiful read, and I highly recommend it. And it's a beautiful read also to read during summertime, which I did in this case. Next, I read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. This is a little bit of a thicker book. I think it's about 500 pages. It was published in 1943, I believe it was. And it's one of the American classics. It says here this was the 75th anniversary edition, which is, again, a testament to how beloved this fiction is. It follows a little girl called Francie, I believe her name was. And she grows up in Brooklyn, again, in the beginning of the 1900s. In deep poverty, and you follow her life together with her family, and it's a thick book, so you get really close to the character. The story, written from a child's perspective in a very harsh world, is something that I keep navigating towards, and I find that storyline quite interesting. So I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. I think this was a really interesting read, and I would highly recommend everyone else to read this as well. Then I read a super thin little, I guess these are essays. A Swedish author called Astrid Lindgren went to this antique bookshop, and I found this little booklet in the middle of all the children's books. And I saw her name on the spine of the book, and it really intrigued me because I haven't really read much from her that hasn't been for children. And I read this, and it was incredible. This was by far, I think, my favorite book that I've read. This book is 45 pages, by the way. It's not, I don't even know if you can call this a book, but it's by far one of the most beautiful things I've ever read in my life. And I don't know if you can get this really in shops. I don't think so. I think this must be like a special edition. In Swedish it's called Liv kan vara så olika, and it means lives can be so different. And it follows two people's lives, two very different people who don't live during the same time even. And the reason why she brings these two characters together is she describes this in the beginning, that she sorrows the fact that there are so many people who've lived on this planet who have died without leaving any traces behind. And so this is why she wants to talk about two lives that she's come across through their correspondence, through their diary entries, and she wants to talk about them, shine some light on them. Beautiful written book, and I was laughing, I was crying, and I felt all kinds of emotions during these 45 pages, and it was just beautiful. So if you ever come across this little book, I will highly recommend reading it, because her way of writing is just extraordinary. And I'm halfway through Abigail by Magda, an Hungarian writer. Again, this is also an NYRB, so another classic, or I guess modern classic. I think this was released in the mid 1900s. Follows a girl called Gina in Hungary during the Second World War. And Gina is being sent to a boarding school by her father without really understanding why. They're very close, the two. And suddenly she's being sent away, and she doesn't understand why. She thinks maybe her father is about to marry someone else, and then they don't want to have her around or so. It's very unclear. But she does go to boarding school, and she gets into trouble. She doesn't get along with her classmates. She tries to escape, etc. She feels very, very alone and misunderstood. Parallel to her story, there's another story about the sculpture in the garden of the boarding school, and the sculpture is called Abigail. Find yourself in a difficult situation, you can go to Abigail and tell her about the difficulties, and she will somehow find a way to help you. I find it's a beautiful story. The surroundings are very well described. I feel like this is a perfect autumn read, just because it takes place in the fall in Hungary at a boarding school, and I love the descriptions about the school uniforms and just the descriptions about the surroundings in general. So I think this is definitely one a good read. Although I would say that it's a little bit of a slow burn. It took me a little while to get into it, and I don't know if it might be because of the translation being a little bit. Sometimes I find when I read translations, the language doesn't feel as fluent, and it's weird that I say this because I don't even speak Hungarian, but I feel like I'm sometimes struggling with the fluency of the language. It might also be the fact that I'm reading one book after the other and they all have different styles of writing, so there is always a slight shock whenever I start reading a new book because I have to get adjusted and get used to the new writing style. But so far I really enjoy it. These are all the books I've read so far.